On behalf of Julian's family, I want to thank you all for being here, and I know others are joining us online. We begin our service this morning with the 23rd Psalm. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bino deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenachaleni, nafshi yeshovev yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeit salmavet lo irara ki ata imadi, shiftecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorerai, dishanta b'shemen roshi kosi revaya, ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai le'orech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, giving me repose in green pastures, leading me beside still waters, restoring my soul, guiding me in straight paths, for that is God's essence. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my foes. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. On behalf of my family, I just want to express our condolences to all of you. And the psalmist speaks of the valley of the shadow of death. It is a deep, dark valley, and it can take a while to navigate. But know that this community is here with you to walk that path, and that valley will open up to new light in time.
Kirachem av al banim, richem Adonai al yirei av. Kihu yada yitzreinu, zachor ki afara nachno enosh kechatzir yamav, ketzitz hasadeh ken yatzitz, ki ruach avrabo ve'enenu lo yakirenu od mekomo, ve'chesed Adonai me'olam ve'adolam al yirei av, ve'tzidkato livnei vanim. As a father has compassion for his children, Adonai has compassion for those who show reverence. God knows how we are fashioned. God remembers that we are but dust. The days of mortals are like grass. We flourish as the flowers of the field. A wind passes over them, and they are no more, and no one can recognize where they grew. But Adonai's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children, to all the reverent ones, endures age after age, unchanging. La kol zman ve'et lachol chefetz tachat hashamayim, et laleret ve'et lamut, et lata'at ve'et la'akor natua, et laharog ve'et lirpo, et lifros ve'et livnot. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for planting and a time for reaping, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for embracing and a time for refraining, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for laughing and a time for weeping, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. The psalmist writes, O Lord, who shall dwell in your sanctuary? Who shall abide upon your holy mountain? He who loves with integrity, does what is right, and speaks the truth in his heart, who has no slander upon his tongue, who does no evil to his fellow man. Julius Pluss now dwells in God's sanctuary. He was a fine man that we all know, a kind man, a generous man. He loved his family and friends. He received their love in return. He was married to Rose for 76 years. Really, it's a lifetime. He and Rose raised 3 loving children, Richard, Janie, and Bill, welcomed into the family Annette, Stanton of blessed memory, and Susan. He and Rose have 6 grandchildren, Matthew, Dana, Danielle, Ari, AJ, and Drew. and 7 great-grandchildren, and all of their loving spouses, members of the family. What a wonderful legacy he and Rose left, the family and this whole community. When I visited with the family last night, it was apparent right as I came in the door. Children, 3 generations in the room. There was this youthful energy, and above all, there was love and respect for Julie. Julie lived 100 years. He was a patriarch. He will be remembered. His life has been a blessing. Julie was born on November 22nd, 1921, in Greeley, Colorado, and was one of 4 children born to Bessie and Sam Pluss. He grew up in Greeley and enjoyed their modest living arrangements with his brothers, Frank and Norman, and sister Nellie. His life with his parents and siblings was a happy one. In 1943, Julie graduated from the University of Colorado in Boulder with a degree in business. Soon after completing his studies in Boulder, Julie was an officer in the Marine Corps and spent his time primarily in Quantico, Virginia, and the South Pacific in Guam. He was a requisitions officer and was honorably discharged from the Marines as a captain. After completing basic training, Julie married his sweetheart and the love of his life, Rose Schmearman, in Washington, D.C. Their long marriage was filled with love and partnership and joy in having and raising children. His 3 children saw Julie as their role model for hard work and integrity and honesty in business, and generosity both to his family members but also to the community at large. He was a good citizen. He was humble. As the children see it, he helped shape their characters. He was ever present for them as he had a home office and could be at all of their events. In high school, the sex ed teacher invited all of the parents to visit the class. He was the only parent to show up, much to the mixed emotions of his children. As Julie's children praised their father last night at our meeting, so did his grandchildren. For them, he was kind and loving and accepting. He was a model for them, too, for patience and stick-to-itiveness. Julie loved his grandchildren for who they were, and they loved him and honored him in return. They remember the Sunday brunches with him and Rose swimming in the pool, playing tennis on the courts. Even the great-grandchildren were always impressed that the Pluss name was known throughout the community. Julie died on Passover. Julie was the king when it came to the Seder. He studied and prepared for the Seders. He would always lead it, much to the delight of his family. Julie came from a religious family. He cared deeply about his Judaism. He instilled that in his children. Although he wasn't involved on Jewish community boards, he was proud of his children for doing so. He was a significant donor to the Jewish community, including to our synagogue. He was always willing to give. When asked, he said yes. Julie returned to Colorado after the completion of World War II and settled with Rose in Denver. After working in the accounting world, he went into partnership with his father, Sam Pluss, in the cattle business. They had feedlots in Weld County. Later, he went into the turkey business with Harry Andrews, and also with his brother Frank and nephews Sam and Jim. During these years, he was president of the Colorado Cattle Feeders Association, a member of the Denver Rotary, and involved with several Denver and Colorado charities and organizations. Julie worked in the family business with his brothers, nephews, and others until they sold the companies to ConAgra in 1987. Julie would bring his kids up to the feedlots, which, as any Coloradan knows, has a distinct and strong smell. Julie would point out that the smell comes from only organic materials. And anyways, the animals put food on the Pluss family table. and come to think of it, on a lot of tables around the country. Julie was one of the few Jewish cowboys in the world and would be considered a gentleman farmer as well. Outside of working in the Colorado poultry and cattle industries, Julie was an avid fisherman who loved fly fishing in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. He was a fantastic card player, especially bridge and cribbage. He loved playing handball on Sunday mornings before heading to watch his beloved Denver Broncos. Growing up, he himself was a good athlete in his own right, and of course, like all of us, loved the outdoors. Julie was a true patriarch of the family and a pillar of the community. He was valued by so many in the community for his generosity and kind spirit, and was truly adored and loved by everyone who was in his presence. He taught all of us about integrity and honor and what it means to be a good citizen. He took such good care of Rose in the final years of her life. It was my pleasure to spend some time with him at his home. We always had wonderful conversations, and Rose was always there, nearby, always in his presence. We will hear much more about Julie Pluss by members of his family. Julie lived a good and long life. He will be remembered with love and respect by so many people who he touched in his life. We will miss him. May God bind up Julie Pluss in the bonds of eternal life. May he rest in peace. Amen. Now I'd like to call upon two speakers. First, Julie's grandson, Matthew, and then his daughter, Janie Rosenbaum.
Thanks everyone for being here. I thought the best way to honor Zadie and to tell his story was to write a letter to his great-grandchildren to let them know how much Zadie meant to me and the entire family. So here goes. And a lot of this is coming from what the rabbi just said as well. So, dear Eliza, Evelyn, Maya, Carter, Reed, Charlie, and Coral, I realize that some of you are old enough now to have memories which involve Zadie and Grandma, but for the younger ones, and just in case the older ones know Zadie's story and how amazing he was, I write this letter on behalf of Zadie's grandchildren, your parents, and to let you know some of our best memories. Zadie's dad moved to the United States from Poland in the early 1900s after going through Ellis Island, and after some time in New York, moved to Greeley, Colorado, and once settled, sent for Zadie's mom and brother and sister. After arrival in Greeley, Zadie was born in 1921. He lived in Greeley with his parents and eventually two brothers and one sister until he went to college in 1938. He always said that growing up in Greeley was always fun with lots of other kids around to play. They lived in a two-bedroom house on the edge of town where he slept on a pull-out couch in the living room with his older brother, Frank. Zadie's mom would keep carp for the gefilte fish in the bathtub in the house until Friday Shabbat, so bathing was somewhat of a challenge, and despite the living through the Great Depression and having meager belongings, Zadie was always quick to tell you that he never felt wanting for anything. He went to CU in Boulder for college and graduated in 1943 with a degree in business. He enrolled in the Marine Corps prior to graduating from CU, and upon graduation went to basic training in South Carolina before heading to Quantico, Virginia, and then South Pacific and Guam to complete his service. He was responsible for the mess hall and for procuring the commissary items at the base. Zadie met Grandma Rose in the latter part of college at CU, and after completing basic training in the Marines, they were married in D.C. before he shipped out to the South Pacific. After the war, Zadie and Grandma settled in Denver, where he was in the accounting world for a bit, and then later went into partnership with his dad in the cattle business with feedlots in Weld County, And later, he went into the turkey business with Harry Andrews and his brother Frank and Sam and Jim. During these years, he was president of Cattle Feeders Association, Rotary, many other organizations, and he worked for the family business with his brothers, nephews, and many others until 1987. The three kids that Grandma and Zadie had were always, he made himself available to the three kids that were, he later made himself available to his grandkids as well. As a young kid, I will always remember going with Zadie to Aunt Nellie's for Shabbat dinner on Fridays, and then on Sundays, Zadie would play handball, and we would go to Sunday school, and then everyone would meet over at Zadie's for tuna fish sandwiches and mac and cheese. Zadie always would eat the burnt crust of the bread and the crunchy part of the mac and cheese, and we would take the soft bread and the soft noodles. After lunch, we'd either go to the Bronco game, where you had to sit in the back of the RTD bus on the way to Mile High, or we would swim and play tennis at their neighborhood pool and tennis courts in the summer months. Zadie was always generous with his time and resources. We would spend the night at Grandma and Zadie's, and he was always up early to make breakfast, whether it be scrambled eggs, cinnamon bread, or some kind of special cereal. Zadie and Grandma were always in attendance at our school events, recitals, special and sporting events. Even as we got older, Zadie was always quick to attend college and graduate school graduations in Chicago, Syracuse, Massachusetts, and Boulder. He never voyaged farther than a trip from Greeley to Denver when he was young. In fact, his first trip outside of Colorado was when he went to basic training in South Carolina. After the war, once he and Grandma saved enough money to travel, they became world travelers. They were among the first from Denver to visit China. They went to Israel many times, Russia, Italy, India, and many other European countries. Thanksgiving trips to Maui were an almost annual treat for the family, and because Zadie was in the turkey business, he insisted on bringing his own turkey in their bowling ball bag. Zadie and Grandma took Dana and I to New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Williamsburg, and Washington, D.C. to see many of the sites and memorials from American history. And despite Dana showering much of the time, Zadie was always patient and kind with a 13 and 11-year-old toting behind. Zadie brought the entire family to Alaska for an amazing trip to celebrate their anniversary, and it will always be one of my best memories of sharing family time together. He loved to go fishing, and I was lucky enough to go on many of those trips with him to Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and Colorado. He had lots of friends and family who fished with him, and after fishing, they would play bridge or cribbage or just tell stories, and this continued until he was almost 90 years old. I will always cherish our trips to fish the Snake, the Teton, the Frying Pan, and the Bighorn rivers. During my college summers and after I returned from college, we would work out together at Tennis World with our trainer, Pete. Starting about 10 years ago, we would go to lunch every Thursday at a variety of locations around town: Pasta, Sam's No. 3, Zadie's, Annie's Cafe, Bull and Bush, and many others. Wherever we went, people would say, "What a great guy he is. Your grandfather's amazing." And I would simply smile, "Yes, he's a great dude." He often said that he hoped to live long enough to see his great-grandchildren and for them to have memories of him. Since Zadie lived beyond his 100th birthday, you all have been lucky enough not only to spend time with him, but to have permanent memories of your time together. He and Grandma often said that the thing that they were most proud of were you guys, the kids and the grandkids. They often referred to you all and all of the grandchildren as their dividends. And while I and everyone here are so very sad about Zadie's passing, I want you to know how lucky all of us are to have had him in our lives. We are the ones who received the dividends by having Zadie guiding us for so long. Zadie wanted to be remembered as a nice guy, a good parent and grandparent, and a good friend. Please know that while he definitely accomplished all of these things, He surpassed all of them and will be known for so much more. He genuinely accepted all of us for who we are and celebrated our differences. He supported us in all of our pursuits and gently pushed us to identify our goals and be the best we could be. Zadie was a great citizen. He was a business advisor for so many. He was a pillar in the community. He was a kind and generous and loving soul. And he simply was an amazing person. He gave all of us the ability to take chances and was so open to allowing us to find our own journey through life. We will miss him deeply, but all of the grandchildren will always treasure the 45-plus years spent together. People often refer to Zadie's generation as the greatest generation, since they have paid such a heavy price eliminating the Nazis from the world and for sacrificing so much. Zadie didn't like being called the greatest generation and instead thought his parents' generation was the greatest, a group of people with little money in a new country with no knowledge of customs or language, and who were uprooted from their homes and forced to work in trades which were totally foreign. This mentality of deflecting attention towards others defined Zadie. His humble beginnings taught him to appreciate and give attention to others. He never bragged or boasted about his financial successes, and instead always was eager to give praise to others. Ultimately, there are so many lessons that Zadie taught us all. Work hard, study hard, play hard. Love your family and be accepting of others. Go see the world. Always root for the Broncos, Nuggets, Avalanche, and Rockies. Look out for the little guy, even if you don't get credit for doing so. Be a good citizen, and when it's your time to step up, take the opportunity. Be kind and humble in everything you do. As you grow, please keep these lessons with you and know that all of us will forever be better people because of Zadie. We will miss him deeply.
I'm happy to see all of you here. You know, when you're a child, you look up to your dad or your mom and think they're perfect. I always thought my dad was perfect. I put him on a pedestal. I really mean no faults. The good thing is that that is a good thing as well as a bad thing. It's hard sometimes to relate to someone who is so perfect. But as I got a little older, I saw he wasn't actually perfect. He did have a few flaws, but still he was the perfect dad for me. My parents traveled the world. When China opened up, they were one of the very first groups to travel there. As Matthew mentioned, they went to Africa, India, Japan, Europe. I think my love for travel partially came from them. We also took family vacations to Hawaii for my parents' big birthdays. Both my mom and dad's birthdays were around Thanksgiving, which made it a perfect time to travel. My dad was so happy to take all of his kids and grandkids on these adventures. In the last 2 years since my father died, and especially this last year, I have spent a lot of time helping with my dad's affairs. And I have been reminded of all the lessons that he taught me. You'll see a theme here. Be a good citizen. Be kind, generous, and caring to others. Never judge a person until you have walked in their shoes. Stanton always felt that my dad was not at all judgmental, and he admired him and wanted to aspire to be more like that. Another lesson was, why is there never enough time to do a job right, but always plenty of time to do it over? He wanted things done well. He did things well. One of the examples was Passover. Passover was his holiday. He led his first Seder in 1962 and led one every year for 55 years. We used to invite people from different families, friends, and anyone who had nowhere to go. He would take out his Haggadah weeks before the Seder and begin to study and figure out how he wanted it to go. When he first began to lead the Seders, we were members of Beth Joseph, and Rabbi Goldberger and Cantor Weiss were the clergy. My dad had a cassette tape of the songs from Passover, and he practiced them every year. He had a good voice, and it was important for him to do well. I have gotten so many texts and emails from people who remember being at one of our Seders over the years. My dad singing and leading the service is a wonderful memory of theirs. For many of them, it was a transformative experience. Ari remembers helping my dad lead the Seder when he was younger, before going off to college. Even now, and yesterday, he can sing the many songs that my dad included. It is so appropriate that he passed away after the first Seder. Now he is truly free. An example that he set was his generosity not only to his family, but the community as well. Although he wasn't someone who wanted to be on boards or at the head of an organization, he was always there to support me and Stanton when we were involved, not only in encouragement, but financially as well. What was important to me became important to him and to my mom. I hope I will be able to continue that tradition. I want to thank his caregivers, Edna, Jeanne, Gladys, and Sylvia, and especially Debbie. Debbie has been with my parents for almost 7 years. We're so grateful for the wonderful way you treated my dad. He was always very grateful, and even though everything had to be his way with his caregivers, he would apologize to them if he had done or said something to offend them. Even in the last few months, when things were clearly going downhill, whenever I came to see my dad, he always looked very put together in his button-down shirt and khaki pants. I also want to thank McKay, who was my dad's hospice nurse. She had been seeing my dad for several months, once a week. He really liked her, and she is a very kind and caring person. Over the last few days, I have heard a lot from people about how much they admired my dad. When I told one of them about the time of his death, which was around 10:30 in the morning, she said, "He seems to favor that time of day for doing his business. He had a short window, and if you missed it, that was that." So true. My dad was a man of strong beliefs and principles, and he did things his way up until the very end. I can't think of a better way to live your life. I love you, Dad. I will miss you, but I'll carry you and your wisdom with me every day.
Thank you for those beautiful words from his family, and we'll keep this conversation going in the next several days. There's a lot to say about Julie, a lot of memories, 100 years on this earth, and he made a big difference in a lot of people's lives. I'd ask you now to rise for the memorial prayer. El Malay Rachamim Shochem Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina B'ma'alot Kedoshim Utahorim Gazorakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Osher Zeleg Ben Shmuel B'Pesi Shehalach La'olamo Began Eden Tehi Menuchato Ana Baal Harachamim Astireo Beseder Kanafech Laolamim Utzror B'tzar Chayin Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'Yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo v'nomar amen. El Malei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Julie Pluss, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our service here at the Hebrew Educational Alliance. We will have an escorted procession to Rose Hill Cemetery. If you'd like to join us in that procession, we'll ask you to start lining up. Go ahead and pull yourselves out of the parking lot and start lining up northbound on Ivanhoe. And please have your hazards on so we can identify that you will be in our procession. If you're not going in the procession, if we can ask you, one, to give way to those who are, and two, maybe ask you to go one block to the west to use Holly to exit so there isn't too much congestion for us on Ivanhoe. We will ask everyone to remain in their places as we escort the family out. If you happen to run into the family in the restroom or grabbing a drink of water, please allow them to do what they need to do and then get to their cars because they do need to get to the cemetery. I'll invite the pallbearers forward at this time.